The moment a pair of women's hands appeared on the white wall of Mechanics' Hall, stitching a button onto a child's shoe, Clara Vale knew she was looking at one of the stolen slides. She recognized the hairline crack beside the woman's thumb. She recognized the green thread and the tiny blue swallow in the lower right-hand corner. Clara's 12-year-old daughter, Lucy, had painted that swallow. 3 weeks earlier, the glass picture had rested in a walnut case beneath the girl's bed. Now, it was being shown to the whole town of Bellford as the work of Percy Hale, Augusta Vale's favorite grandson. Percy stood beside the magic lantern in a stiff new collar, gripping the pages of his speech. The burner hissed behind him. In the front rows sat the owners of the shoe factories, the pastor, the newspaper editor, and the ladies of the Civic Improvement Society. Augusta smiled at them from beneath a black hat crowned with one rigid ostrich feather. Then the frame shifted. Words that had not appeared in the printed program emerged on the wall. Drawn from life by Lucy Vale, age 12. Augusta's smile vanished. She ordered the lantern extinguished, but Percy seemed not to hear. He inserted the next slide, and the audience saw a thin young woman standing beside a gluing table. Her sleeves were rolled above her elbows. Dark stains covered her fingers, and a tin factory number hung from her bodice. The girl's face was still visible inside Augusta's aging one. Whispers moved across the hall. Beside Clara, her husband stopped breathing. All his life, Nathan had believed that his mother had never worked in a factory, and that a woman who bore the name Vale could never take what belonged to someone else. Now the enormous illuminated wall was speaking more loudly than the family name. But the story had not begun in Mechanics' Hall. It had not even begun with the missing glass pictures. It had begun in November of 1907, when Gideon Vale placed a sliver of blue glass in his granddaughter's palm and told her that even a dark room could preserve a piece of sky. Bellford stood on the Merrimack River, between two cities whose names were always printed larger on the maps. Coal smoke hung above the town through most of the day. Factory whistles woke the streets before the church bells did, and after sunset, yellow electric light poured from the tall windows of the shoe shops. A streetcar ran along Main Street by then, but gas lamps still burned in the narrow lanes, and carriage horses shied whenever one of the new motor cars rattled past. Augusta Vale's house occupied the corner of Chestnut and Fifth. It was a gray, 3-story place with a narrow turret and tall windows. Behind it stood a small brick cottage that had once been intended for a coachman. Nathan, Clara, and Lucy lived there. Augusta often reminded them that she had allowed them to take the cottage after the wedding. She spoke as though she opened its door for Clara anew every morning. Nathan paid for coal, lighting, and repairs to the roof. Clara bought the food and had sewn every curtain. But Augusta owned the ground, the walls, and the narrow passage between the two houses. In her own mind, that ownership also gave her the right to enter without knocking, rearrange the chairs, inspect the pantry, and decide which thoughts were suitable for her son and granddaughter. Gideon had been different. While he was alive, people called him master of the house too, but he wore authority awkwardly, like a coat cut for a broader man. He repaired clocks, camera lenses, opera glasses, and magic lanterns. As a young man, he had traveled the county fairs with a lecturer who projected views of Niagara Falls, the ruins of Rome, and moral tales about the ruin brought by drink. Later, he settled in Bellford and opened a workshop above the apothecary. His hands always smelled of brass, machine oil, and camphor. Lucy loved that smell. After school, she climbed the steep stairs to the workshop and watched ordinary glass become a picture. Gideon photographed some slides and painted others by hand with transparent color. Once a slide was placed in front of a powerful light, a woman no larger than a palm could rise on the wall taller than anyone in the room. On that November afternoon, Gideon cut a tiny swallow from cobalt glass. It was no longer than Lucy's thumbnail. He laid it across her palm and told her to hold it toward the window. Through the blue glass, the dull winter sky turned deep and almost summery. Lucy laughed. Gideon explained that the blue mark would appear on every slide they made together. It was not a signature for vanity's sake. It was a promise that they would never conceal the name of the person who had truly seen and made the image. Lucy asked why they needed a promise if they already knew the truth. Gideon looked at her over his round spectacles. People were very willing to remember the person who held the lantern, he told her. They often forgot the person who created what its light revealed. Clara heard him from the doorway. She had brought them bread, cheese, and a jar of coffee. At the time, the remark sounded like one of Gideon's old-fashioned little lessons. Later, she repeated it to herself so often that the words began to feel like a prayer. Gideon was building a series of pictures about the women of Bellford. Not the factory owners' wives riding in carriages, and not the ladies posing at church picnics. He wanted to show the hands upon which the town depended. Cutters, laundresses, midwives, bookbinders, teachers, cooks, and widows who rented beds to boarders. Managers rarely allowed photography inside the workshops. They feared the pictures would reach the newspapers and expose the crowding, the dust, or the youth of some of their workers. So Lucy sketched the women in a small album. At home, she transferred the outlines onto glass, while Gideon prepared the colors. When a slide was finished, they fixed a blue swallow to its lower corner and sealed it beneath a second, thinner pane. The first picture showed Mrs. Novak, who kept a laundry beside the canal. She was wringing a hotel sheet. Steam concealed part of her face, but the viewer could see her red wrists and the dark wedding band she never removed. Next came Mrs. Price, the midwife who served 3 parishes. Then Miss Fitch, feeding the schoolhouse stove. A young Italian woman named Rosa, carrying a box of wooden heels, and Clara herself, at the retouching table in the photographer's studio. Clara worked 3 days a week for Barrow and Pike. She retouched negatives and hand-colored portraits. People came to the studio because they wanted to look richer, younger, and less troubled than they felt. Clara softened scars and wrinkles. She added pink to the cheeks of babies whose grieving parents had brought them for one final photograph. She knew how to make a lie gentle and convincing. That was why she valued Lucy's drawings so deeply. The girl never corrected the hands. If a worker's fingers had been bent by an awl, they remained bent on the glass. Augusta first saw the series on Thanksgiving Day. The family had gathered in her dining room. The fireplace made the room too warm, and the heavy furniture made it feel crowded. Augusta's widowed daughter, Lydia, sat beside her 16-year-old son, Percy. Nathan, Clara, and Lucy sat opposite them. Pastor Whitcomb had also been invited because Augusta disliked family dinners without at least one witness to the respectability of her household. After the turkey, Gideon placed a small lantern on the sideboard. He wanted to show the 6 finished pictures. Lucy herself slid the first frame before the light. Mrs. Novak appeared on a sheet stretched across the wall surrounded by steam. Then came the midwife with her worn bag, followed by 3 girls sewing buttons onto shoes. Pastor Whitcomb called the pictures touching. Percy was more interested in the lantern's mechanism. Lydia remarked that Rosa's hands looked unnecessarily coarse. Augusta said nothing until Clara appeared at the retouching table. Then she asked why the Vale family should turn women's hardship into a spectacle. Gideon replied that hardship became shame only when people forced it into silence. Augusta looked at her husband as though he had mentioned a private illness in front of a guest. When the meal ended, she ordered the lantern put away. The house, she said, already contained enough respectable portraits. Lucy remained quiet for the rest of the evening. Back in the cottage, she wrapped the loose blue swallow in a handkerchief and hid it beneath her pillow. Clara asked whether she wanted to abandon the project. Lucy shook her head. Her grandmother was not angry at the pictures, she said. She was angry at what they allowed people to see. At 12 years old, the child understood Augusta more clearly than any of the adults at the table. In January, Gideon caught a chill. He continued going to the workshop until his coughing made the panes tremble in their frames. Within a week, the doctor diagnosed pneumonia and ordered him to remain in bed. Gideon still asked about the unfinished views and warned Lucy not to mix green pigment under gaslight. He died early one morning while the river lay beneath a sheet of gray ice. After the funeral, Augusta locked his workshop. She wore the key on a chain at her waist. The tools had to be inventoried, she said, and the room cleared for another tenant. Nathan asked her not to hurry. She replied that grief did not pay taxes. 3 days later, she allowed Lucy to take the lantern, the sketchbook, the paints, and a walnut case of glass slides. The case was heavy and fitted with 36 narrow slots. 22 held finished views, 5 more contained work in progress, and the rest held clean glass. Gideon had burned the shape of a swallow into the lid. There was no name and no date. Augusta watched Nathan carry the case across the yard. It could remain in the cottage, she said, only until the family decided what should become of Gideon's legacy. Clara reminded her that Gideon had given it to Lucy himself. Her mother-in-law turned slowly. Clara had not been present for her husband's final instructions, she said. Things belonging to the Vale family did not cease to be family property merely because a child had been allowed to play with them. Nathan stood between the two women with the case in his arms. Clara waited for him to speak. He only asked them not to begin an argument in the yard so soon after the funeral. That was how Nathan usually took his mother's side. He called silence peace, even when the silence left his wife standing alone. Lucy placed the walnut case beneath her bed. Every evening, she counted the contents. 22 completed slides, 5 begun, 9 blank. She wrote the order in a school notebook and drew a tiny swallow beside each number. Clara noticed, but said nothing. Counting comforted the girl. As long as every slot had a number, grief did not feel quite so shapeless. In February, Lucy completed a view of a woman beside a large factory machine. Gideon had prepared the photographic outline before falling ill, but the color belonged to Lucy. She added the brown leather belt, the white dust in the woman's hair, and a red thread clinging to one sleeve. Clara helped set the color with heat. Together they sealed a blue bird into the corner. It became the 23rd finished slide. 4 days later, it was gone. Lucy discovered the empty slot on a Saturday morning. She did not cry out or call for her mother. She pulled the case from beneath the bed, sat on the floor, and counted everything again. Clara found her half an hour later with the notebook on her knees and one finger resting beside the number 23. The bedroom window was shut. So was the door leading to the kitchen. On Thursday, Clara had been at the studio, Nathan at the newspaper office, and Lucy at school. Augusta had visited the cottage that day. She had left a jar of apple jelly on the table and removed several of Nathan's shirts because, in her opinion, Clara never starched his collars properly. Clara asked whether Lucy had seen the slide since her grandmother's visit. The girl shook her head. Then, too quickly, she suggested that Augusta might only have wanted to show it to someone. The old caution had already entered her voice. Children sometimes defend an adult not because they trust that person, but because they fear what their own truth will set in motion. Clara waited for Nathan beside the stove that evening. He arrived late, smelling of wet wool and printer's ink. The paper was preparing its Sunday edition, and he had been forced to set the same report about the city council election twice after an editor changed the wording. Clara told him about the empty slot. Nathan placed his boots on an old newspaper and asked whether Lucy might have broken the glass and hidden the pieces. Clara reminded him that the child had never concealed an accident. Besides, the newest completed picture had disappeared immediately after Augusta's visit. Nathan rubbed a black mark on his thumb. Perhaps his mother had taken the slide to have it framed or included in an inventory of Gideon's effects. He used the word taken gently, as though it described something innocent. Clara asked why Augusta had said nothing. He promised to ask her when an opportunity arose. When an opportunity arose meant not tonight and probably never. After 12 years of marriage, Clara knew every shade of that postponement. Nathan was not cruel. He did not curse, drink away his wages, or disappear after payday. When Lucy fell ill, he heated water through the night and changed the cloths on her forehead. When Clara was exhausted, he cleaned the stove himself. But in his mother's presence, he became a boy again, a boy permitted to sit at the table only if he kept his back straight and answered only after he had been addressed. Augusta had raised him to believe that gratitude carried no final payment.
The house, his schooling, his place at the newspaper, even his wedding suit had all been extended to him as loans. The interest was obedience. A week later, the view of Mrs. Novak disappeared. After that second loss, Clara moved the walnut case into her own wardrobe and wrapped it in an old blanket. The wardrobe had no lock. In fact, only the cottage's outside door could be secured, and Augusta kept a spare key in case of fire. The precaution did no good. The following day, the picture of the 3 girls at the button table vanished as well. The thief was not removing the slides in order. Someone was choosing the most complete and expressive pictures. The clean glass remained untouched. So did the unfinished views. Clara asked Nathan to change the lock. The request astonished him. He heard it not as a desire to protect their daughter's belongings, but as a declaration of war across the yard.
His mother would be insulted, he said, and a new lock would not prove who had taken the glass. Clara asked what proof he required. Nathan stared into the stove for a long time. At last he admitted that he could not imagine his mother stealing her own husband's work from her own granddaughter. Clara told him that imagination was not required. He only had to believe his wife and child. He looked up. There was weariness in his eyes, but no resolve. Nathan asked her not to draw Lucy into a quarrel between 2 women. The phrase wounded Clara more than an open accusation would have. It transformed their daughter's missing property into a weapon Clara had invented against her mother-in-law. That night, she listened to melting snow run through the drainpipe. Nathan lay beside her without moving. There was no shouting between them, only a narrow strip of untouched sheet. On Monday morning, Clara went to the large house herself.
It smelled of lemon polish, coal, and dried lavender. A new gramophone stood in the parlor, although Augusta allowed no one to wind it without her permission. Silver frames lined the mantel. Gideon as a young man, Nathan in his school uniform, Lydia in her wedding veil, and Percy holding a wooden rifle. There was no photograph of Clara. Lucy appeared only in one family group, half hidden behind her grandmother's shoulder. Augusta received her daughter-in-law in the morning room. Cards for the Civic Improvement Society's spring reception lay across the desk. Augusta was writing each guest's name in careful script. Clara asked about the 3 glass slides. Her mother-in-law sprinkled sand over the wet ink before looking up. Gideon's possessions were under her care, she explained. Several views had been removed so their condition could be assessed. Clara asked her to return them to Lucy. A child could not own objects whose value she did not understand, Augusta replied.
Lucy had been smearing good glass with paint, and Clara encouraged the foolishness out of spite. Gideon had been ill and had indulged the girl. Clara mentioned the drawings in Lucy's notebook and the swallows sealed into every completed frame. Something shifted in Augusta's expression. It was not fear yet, only the irritation of someone hearing a familiar word in a place where she had hoped never to hear it again. A colored bird did not transform family property into a child's possession, she said. Then she walked to the window and looked across at the brick cottage. Seen from that side, it appeared to be little more than another object in her yard, an outbuilding she could close, demolish, or give to somebody else. Augusta reminded Clara that Nathan earned a modest wage and that the studio paid a woman half what it paid a man. Without the Vale property, the family would be renting rooms above a shop or living near the factory canal.
People who were given a roof should not treat every visit from their benefactor as an intrusion. Gratitude did not give anyone the right to enter a girl's bedroom and carry away her work, Clara answered. Augusta turned from the window. Her voice grew colder. How could the daughter of a laundress know what rights belonged to a family house? Clara's mother had indeed washed clothes for a living. After her husband's death, she had kept a small laundry in Lowell and raised 2 daughters with her arms in lye water. Clara was not ashamed of her. Yet Augusta could make the word laundress sound like a criminal conviction. She went on to say that Clara had brought the suspicions of the poor into the Vale home. She counted change after leaving the grocer, checked the windows each night, and remembered where every object lay. Respectable families, Augusta said, were founded on trust. Clara looked at the invitations. Augusta had remembered every name.
Forgetting the name of a woman in her circle would have been unforgivably rude. Erasing her granddaughter's name from the girl's own work somehow counted as stewardship. On her way out, Clara noticed a wooden lantern frame on a side table. It held no glass, but a scrap of blue wrapping paper clung to one edge, the same paper Gideon used around finished slides. Clara stopped. Augusta saw it too. With one motion, she covered the frame beneath a stack of church bulletins. That was the first moment Clara understood. The slides were not being inventoried or appraised. They were being prepared for a public showing. Percy Hale was Lucy's cousin and 4 years her senior. He was tall and nearsighted and forever cleaning his spectacles with the end of his necktie. After his father's death, he and Lydia had moved into Augusta's house. Percy dreamed of attending a technical school in Boston, but his mother could not afford it. That spring, the Bellford Mechanics Association announced a competition for young men. The winner would receive 2 years of support at a school of applied science. Each contestant was required to give a public lecture on the benefits industry had brought to Bellford. Models, diagrams, and magic lantern pictures were permitted. Nathan had typeset the announcement. He brought a proof home and laid it on the kitchen table. Lucy read it twice before asking whether girls could enter. The rules specified young men between 16 and 20. Nathan told her that technical schools seldom accepted women, but matters might be different by the time she was old enough. Lucy filled in the proof and returned it without comment. Several days later, Percy came to the cottage carrying a book of engravings. He was unusually courteous to Lucy. He asked how Gideon had colored the glass, what fixed the pigment, and where they found their subjects. Lucy answered eagerly. She was not accustomed to her older cousin showing interest in her work. Clara noticed that Percy kept glancing toward the wardrobe. After he left, Lucy said that perhaps she could help him prepare new views for the competition. Then everything her grandfather taught her would still serve the family. Clara asked whether Percy had requested the finished pictures. No, Lucy said. He wanted to learn to make his own. The following day, 4 more views disappeared from the case. One of them was the picture of Clara at the retouching table. 7 empty slots now gaped between the remaining slides. Lucy stopped offering explanations. She closed the lid, laid both hands across it, and begged her mother not to tell Nathan. She was ashamed that her father would fail to believe her again. Clara sat on the floor beside her. The person who had not been believed was not the one who should feel shame, she said. The words did not comfort the girl. That evening, Lucy left the lamp unlit in her room. The loose blue swallow remained wrapped in its handkerchief beneath her pillow. Sunday dinner at Augusta's was expected of the family, whether they wished to attend or not. An absence had to be explained in advance, an illness confirmed by a doctor, and work supported by a note from one's employer. On the first Sunday in March, Clara wanted to remain at home. Nathan argued
that staying away would only confirm his mother's belief that Clara wanted a quarrel. At the table, Augusta announced that Percy had entered the Mechanics Association competition. His lecture would be titled, "The Hands of Industry, How Labor Built Bellford." Clara heard Lucy draw in a sharp breath. The title was almost identical to Gideon's name for the series, "The Hands That Hold Up a Town." Percy would not look at his cousin. Lydia glowed with pride. Their father would have been delighted, she said, and his old lantern pictures would finally serve a worthy purpose. Clara asked which pictures Percy intended to use. Augusta cut a slice of roast before answering. The family owned a suitable collection prepared by Gideon. They would select the views related to industry and exclude any scenes that appeared overly bleak or domestic. Lucy quietly said that she had made those pictures with her grandfather. The dining room fell silent enough for everyone to hear the cooling fireplace click in the parlor. Augusta looked across at the girl. In front of the pastor, she knew how to make cruelty sound tender. Helping an adult did not make a child the creator of a serious work, she explained. Lucy had passed Gideon his colors and applied a few simple strokes. If the family collection could help Percy obtain an education, a loving cousin should be pleased. Lucy went pale. She tried to answer, but Augusta had already turned to Pastor Whitcomb. He observed uneasily that self-sacrifice was an ornament to any young woman. Clara put down her fork. A sacrifice was something a person chose to give, she said. If it was taken without permission, there was another word for it. Lydia gasped. Percy dropped his spoon. Nathan spoke Clara's name in warning. Augusta dabbed her mouth with her napkin. Without raising her voice, she informed the pastor that Clara had grown up in a home where every cake of soap had to be counted. Naturally, she found family generosity difficult to understand. Some people, Augusta added, spoke most loudly about property while living rent-free in someone else's house. Heat rose into Clara's face. The humiliation had been carefully aimed. They were no longer discussing glass slides. Augusta was reminding everyone that the table, the roof, and even the chair beneath Clara existed by her permission. Clara waited for Nathan. He sat opposite her, gripping his knife. For a moment, she thought he would speak. Instead, he asked both his mother and his wife not to ruin the meal. Lucy rose. She was not crying. She said she felt unwell and left the room. Clara followed. Behind them, Augusta remarked that poor manners were often called dignity when a family could not afford proper breeding. Nathan caught up with his wife in the yard. Snow was melting and black water ran beneath their shoes. He was angry, not with his mother but with Clara for making an accusation in front of the pastor. Clara asked whether he had heard his mother call Lucy a liar. Augusta had said nothing of the sort, Nathan insisted. Then Clara understood. A person did not always fail to hear the truth because it had been spoken too softly. Sometimes he translated every cruel word before it reached him, turning it into language he could bear to live with. She walked back to the cottage holding Lucy's hand. Nathan remained in the yard. For the first time in 12 years, Clara closed the door in his face. Nathan knocked several minutes later. Clara let him enter, but she did not make the conversation easier for him. He removed his wet coat and stood beside the stove. His mother had been unfair, he admitted. The words cost him effort, yet he spoke as if the injustice lay only in an unfortunate choice of phrase. Then he added that Clara could have discussed the matter with him before dinner. She reminded him of every discussion they had already had. The first empty slot, the second, the request for a new lock, Lucy's own words. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked whether Clara had actually seen his mother carrying away a slide. The question was quiet. That made it worse. "No," Clara said. Nathan exhaled as if the absence of one eyewitness outweighed every other emptiness.
He promised to speak to Percy and settle the problem after the competition.
After the competition, the pictures would already have been shown under another person's name. Clara told him she was no longer asking him to settle anything. She would recover their daughter's work herself. Nathan was about to object when Lucy entered, carrying the walnut case. She placed it on the kitchen table and lifted the lid. 7 empty slots stood among the remaining pictures. In the lamplight, they looked black. Lucy did not accuse her grandmother. She only asked her father to look. Nathan ran a finger along each hollow space. Then he closed the lid and promised to speak to Augusta the following morning. Lucy asked whether he believed her. He said he believed that the slides were gone. It was not the same thing. The girl understood. She took the case and returned to her room. Clara saw pain in her husband's face. Even pain could not make him name the person he was afraid to disbelieve. Nathan crossed the yard before breakfast. He returned 20 minutes later. Augusta admitted taking several of the views. She intended to return them after the lecture, he explained. Gideon had prepared the collection with family money. The lantern belonged to Augusta as his widow, and Percy needed the pictures more than Lucy did. In her opinion, no theft had occurred. Nathan repeated all of this to Clara and added that at least the misunderstanding had been resolved. Had he brought the pictures back? He looked away. Augusta would not release them because the frames had already been sent to Mechanics Hall for inspection. Had he demanded that Lucy's name appear on the work? The competition was for Percy, he said, and a child's name might confuse the judges. After the lecture, the family could arrange a private showing and give Lucy proper praise. Clara looked at him and felt not anger, but emptiness. His mother had finally admitted the truth, and still Nathan used the admission only to explain why justice should be postponed. An empty slot could not be praised after another person had taken its place, she told him. Nathan answered more sharply than usual. Percy had lost his father. The scholarship could determine the course of his life. Were a few pictures really more important than the boy's future? Why, Clara asked, did a boy's future have to be built out of a girl's stolen one? Nathan had no answer. Barrow and Pike's photography studio occupied a long room with north-facing windows. Painted backdrops lined one wall, a garden with a marble column, a library, a seashore, and a drawing room that did not exist in any Bellford house. Each customer selected the life he wished to preserve on paper. Mr. Barrow took the photographs. Mr. Pike kept the accounts and never entered the darkroom. Clara retouched negatives, while another employee, Edna Shaw, cleaned the glass and mounted prints on card. On Monday after the family dinner, Clara brought one of Gideon's surviving slides to work. It showed Miss Fitch beside the schoolhouse stove. The blue swallow gleamed in the corner. Clara placed the glass on the illuminated table and examined it with a lens. The bird was sealed between 2 panes. Removing it would require peeling apart the paper frame, but a person could paste a new label over the old one without disturbing the image. That, she suspected, was exactly what Augusta had done. Edna noticed Clara studying the edge and asked about the slide. After hearing the story, she remembered that Gideon had visited the studio shortly before his illness. He had ordered small contact prints from several of Lucy's drawings. Clara knew nothing about the order. Mr. Barrow found the envelope among his old commissions. Someone had written "Women's Hands" across it. Inside lay a spoiled proof of Mrs. Novak in the steam, no larger than a postal card. Gideon had left a strip of white paper beneath the image. Clara warmed the print with her breath and angled it toward the light. Indented letters emerged in the white margin. Someone had written on a sheet placed above it, "For the woman whose hands are shown here." Edna recalled that Gideon had requested 2 prints of each picture. One was for his own record. The other was to be given to the woman depicted. He had collected the completed order himself, and Barrow assumed that he distributed the cards before Christmas. Clara carried the spoiled print home. Wind dragged smoke along the streets. Electric bulbs glowed in the shop windows, while women in the poorer houses still placed kerosene lamps close to the glass to make every bit of light count. If Gideon had distributed the cards, witnesses to his purpose existed throughout Bellford. Yet Clara did not want to parade an army of women before Nathan's conscience. Her husband should have believed his daughter before a laundress, a photographer, or a piece of paper made disbelief impossible. Still, she could not wait. The next day, she went to see Mrs. Novak. The laundry occupied the ground floor of a wooden house near the canal. Steam clouded the windows. Hotel sheets, clerks' shirts, and Augusta Vale's lace pillowcases hung from ropes overhead. Anna Novak listened, dried her hands on her apron, and opened a tin box. Inside was a photographic card showing her at the wash tub. Beneath the image, Lucy had written, "Anna Novak. She washed the fever ward linen when everyone else was afraid to enter." A blue swallow shone in the corner. Gideon had asked Anna to attend a future showing and explain that her labor was work, not charity. Lucy was supposed to change the slides herself. The exhibition had been planned for spring, but no date had been chosen before Gideon died. Anna asked why Mrs. Vale was giving the pictures to a boy. Augusta considered them family property, Clara said. Mrs. Novak gave a dry laugh. Wealthy people often called someone family only when they intended to leave him something, she observed. Anyone from whom they meant to take something became a servant. Then she showed Clara an old scar on her wrist. It appeared in Lucy's drawing. Neither Gideon nor the girl had asked her to hide it. That was why Anna had kept the card. She allowed Clara to borrow it until the lecture. That same day, Clara found Mrs. Price. The midwife lived above the apothecary and kept her card between the pages of a medical handbook. A dried mint leaf had been fixed to the back. Gideon had written that Mrs. Price delivered 812 children and had lost count of her sleepless nights. Miss Fitch displayed her own card on the schoolroom desk. Lucy had made the preliminary sketch during class, the teacher explained. The girl chose the moment after the pupils had left, while Miss Fitch carried coal to the stove. Gideon wanted to show not a teacher at the blackboard, but the woman who arrived before every child and left after the last one. Within 3 days, Clara had collected 5 cards. Together, they proved that Gideon and Lucy had created the series. They did not prove which individual pieces Augusta had removed from the case. Then Clara remembered the empty lantern frame beneath the church bulletins and the scrap of blue paper. She asked Mr. Barrow what steam would do to a newly pasted paper mount. The old photographer frowned. He disliked family disputes, especially disputes involving the woman who ordered 12 formal portraits from him every year. But Clara had worked for him for 9 years and had never ruined an important negative.
Barrow explained that fresh gum arabic softened in damp air. If Augusta had pasted new labels over the old frames, the additions could be lifted without damaging the glass. First, however, Clara would have to get the slides into her own hands. She said that she would. For the first time in weeks, she believed it. Meanwhile, Percy rehearsed in Augusta's front parlor. Every evening, his voice carried across the yard through a window opened against the heat. He spoke about machinery, productivity, and discipline. The women on the slides became evidence of the factory owner's success. Mrs. Novak's picture was described as proof that modern laundries freed housewives from drudgery, although Anna scrubbed by hand for 12 hours a day. The girls at the button table were offered as proof that industry gave young people honest employment. There was no mention of coughing, cuts, or payment by the 1,000 buttons. Lucy listened from the cottage window, her mouth set in a hard line. One evening, Percy stumbled over a passage. Augusta made him repeat it 4 times. Then she told him that the judges would see him as Gideon's successor if only he carried himself like a veil instead of a hail. Clara saw Lucy flinch. Percy had inherited his father's surname. Augusta intended to give him not only someone else's pictures, but another name, the one she considered more useful. The following night, Percy came to the cottage without his coat. He was cold and held his arms across his chest. Augusta had mixed up the order of the pictures, he said. He needed Lucy to explain their proper sequence. Lucy asked whether he knew where the slides had come from. Percy reddened. Gideon took the photographs, he said, and Lucy helped color them. That was what Augusta had told him. The girl brought out her notebook. She showed him the original studies, the bend in Mrs. Novak's fingers, the button table, the fold of Clara's apron. Some pages carried dates weeks earlier than the finished glass views. Percy turned the pages in silence. Then he asked why Lucy had not written out her full name on each slide. She showed him the blue swallow. He stared at the bird for a long time. At last, he admitted that the swallows on the exhibition slides had been covered with black paper corners. Augusta said the patches of color distracted from the image. Lucy closed the notebook. Clara expected anger. Instead, her daughter merely asked whether Percy would return the pictures. He could not, the boy said. If he withdrew from the competition, he would lose his chance at the scholarship. Lydia had already written to Boston, and Augusta had ordered his new suit. After the contest, he promised, he would tell everyone that Lucy had helped him. Clara heard Nathan's voice inside the boy's answer. The same postponement, the same small concession offered in place of justice. In the Vale family, a wrong was always to be corrected later, after it had already rewarded the person who committed it. Could he accept the prize, knowing that he had drawn none of the hands? Percy removed his spectacles. Without them, he looked much younger. The scholarship was awarded for the lecture, he said, not the illustrations. Clara did not argue. She only asked him to remember the sentence. A person sometimes needed to hear his own excuse a second time, after it had already become his fate. Percy left. He looked back at Lucy from the threshold, but she did not raise her head. That night, Lucy took the blue swallow from around her neck. She had worn it beneath her dress since Gideon's death. Now she placed it in an empty slot inside the walnut case and shut the lid. Clara understood. Her daughter no longer believed that her grandfather's promise had any power. After that, Lucy stopped walking past Gideon's old workshop. She took the longer road beside the river on her way home from school. Her sketchbook remained closed, and dust gathered on the clean glass inside the case. Nathan noticed, but he said little. At breakfast, he made a point of asking about Lucy's lessons. He brought home thick scraps of paper from the newspaper office. Once, he bought her a new pencil in a metal holder. Lucy thanked him and placed each gift inside her desk. Clara did not interfere. Some injuries could not be mended by stitching kindness around the edges. The tear itself had to be acknowledged. In the middle of March, Nathan returned home carrying a long proof from the newspaper. He laid it beside Clara's plate, as carefully as though it were hot glass. The notice announced that Percy Hale would present original views of Bellford, prepared under the direction of the late Gideon Vale. The young lecturer, it said, was continuing his grandfather's proud educational tradition. Percy was every bit as much Gideon's grandson as Lucy, although he carried his father's surname. The important word was original. The audience would assume the images were Percy's work. Nathan explained that Augusta had brought the text to the newspaper. He had refused to set it and passed it to another printer. Then he asked the editor to remove the word original. Augusta had paid for the notice and insisted that it remain. Clara asked what he had done after that. He had come home. She said nothing. Nathan sat opposite Lucy. This time, he did not ask to inspect the walnut case or question her about dates. He told his daughter that he should have believed her from the beginning. Lucy looked down at the printed proof. Did he believe her now because the truth had appeared in type? Nathan did not defend himself. He admitted that he had allowed his mother to become the witness for something his wife and daughter had already witnessed. It had been easier to doubt two people he loved than to doubt the woman to whom he had felt indebted all his life. Lucy asked whether he would bring back the slides. Nathan said he would go for them at once. Augusta returned none of them. He came back an hour later, pale and bareheaded in the wet snow. His mother said the collection had already been listed in the program. Removing it now would humiliate Percy. She had also reminded Nathan that the newspaper received city work through her friendship with Councilman Eldridge. A public scandal might injure more than the family. For the first time, Nathan heard a threat inside his mother's list of favors. Everything he had once called help became a rope whose other end she held. He had demanded that Lucy's name at least be printed beneath the images. Augusta replied that a 12-year-old girl had no name in an industrial competition, and that the audience would laugh at the entire family if they learned the slides had been colored by a child. Then Nathan told his mother he would not attend the lecture. Augusta asked whether the absence of a weak man had ever stopped a strong woman from finishing what she began. Nathan did not repeat that part to Clara immediately. He sat at the table and studied his own hands, marked with small cuts from metal type. All his life, he said, he had called his mother strong. Only now did he understand how often she used the word strength to describe another person's inability to refuse her. Clara waited. He admitted that the slides remained in the large house. It was not enough. Yet for once, Nathan had returned without an explanation for his mother. He had returned with the truth about his own failure. The next morning, men began carrying furniture out of Gideon's workshop. Clara saw a wagon bearing the sign of a second-hand dealer. Two laborers were bringing boxes of instruments down the narrow stairs. Augusta had decided to clear the premises before the end of the month. Lucy stood on the opposite corner. When she saw the brass tube of one of her grandfather's lanterns in a stranger's arms, she ran into the street. Clara caught her before she reached the wagon. The dealer produced Augusta's receipt. The entire contents of the workshop had been sold as one lot: workbench, cabinets, lens mounts, clock parts, 3 lanterns, and several crates of tools. Nathan arrived from the newspaper after half the goods had been loaded. He argued with the dealer, but the man would not surrender property for which he had already paid. Nathan used a week's wages to buy back one small green lantern and an oak stool. He could afford nothing more. Augusta watched from the pavement. The instruments were rusting, she said, and no member of the family intended to continue Gideon's trade. Percy would become an engineer, not a traveling showman. Lucy held the lantern against her chest. A crescent-shaped scratch marked its side. It was the same lantern they had used on Thanksgiving. Clara asked about Gideon's personal papers and unfinished slides. Augusta said that everything valuable had already been selected. The dealer fastened the rear of the wagon. It rolled toward the bridge, carrying Gideon's boxes of screws arranged by size, a cup of dried black pigment, and the tall chair upon which Lucy's feet had never reached the floor. The girl did not cry. Nathan did. He turned away as though snow had struck his eyes. Mr. Bixby, the apothecary, stepped onto his porch. The workshop stood above his shop, and he had known Gideon for 30 years. When he saw the loaded wagon, he swore, despite the presence of ladies. Augusta had not sold everything, he told them. A narrow cabinet remained bolted to the wall in the rear closet. The dealers could not remove it without a crowbar. Mr. Bixby intended to call a carpenter. Nathan asked to be allowed upstairs. Augusta objected that the room was rented in her name. The apothecary corrected her. Gideon had personally paid the rent through the 1st of April. He would permit the man's son to inspect the cabinet before anyone tore it down. For once, Augusta's authority was stopped not by a plea, but by another person's right to a locked door. Nathan, Clara, and Lucy climbed the stairs. Augusta remained below, her black feather visible through the apothecary's front window. The workshop looked larger without its furniture. Rectangles of clean wood marked the places where cabinets had stood. A circle of sunlight from Gideon's magnifying lens had burned the paint beside the window. On the rear wall hung a thin cabinet with 3 brass hinges. Nathan pulled at the door. It was locked. Then he remembered the little key attached to his father's watch chain. Gideon had given him the watch a week before his death. Nathan had assumed the key belonged to its case and never tried it anywhere else. It opened the cabinet. There was no money, will, or jewelry inside, only a wooden cassette, a copper plate cut with the outline of a swallow, and 11 old glass slides wrapped in cloth. Lucy recognized the copper plate. Her grandfather had laid it across each frame when he marked the place for the blue bird. The old glass was thicker than the modern slides and blackened around some of the edges. The pictures showed Bellford 30 years earlier. The wooden dam, the first shoe shop, a fire brigade with a hand pump, and women standing at a long gluing table. The final slide carried a date from June 1876. Clara lifted it toward the window. In the dim negative stood a young woman. She held a burned hand against her apron. A factory number, 147, hung at her breast. Her face was thin and determined, with straight dark brows. Nathan recognized his mother first. He whispered her name. Lucy asked why her grandmother was dressed like a factory girl. Nathan could not answer. Since childhood, he had been told that Augusta was the daughter of a leather merchant from Worcester. She had been educated by a private tutor and met Gideon at the home of mutual friends. She had never mentioned a factory. She would not even allow Lydia or Clara to buy shoes from workshops where the women ate at their benches. Glue and dirt, Augusta liked to say, soaked into the character. A narrow strip of frosted glass lay in the bottom of the cassette. Clara placed it over the old slide. Scratched lines matched at the lower edge, and an inscription appeared. Gussie Moran, 17. Saved Mary Doyle in the gluing room fire. Gussie had been Augusta's childhood name.
Lucy studied her grandmother's face. There was no triumph in the girl's expression. Gideon had made Augusta look brave, she said. Clara felt Nathan flinch. The slide concealed more than Augusta's lie. It preserved another memory of her. Once she had been a worker with a burned hand. Once she had carried a friend out of a fire. Gideon had protected the truth of that courage even after Augusta erased it from the family's history. In the cabinet's lower compartment lay an unfinished circular lantern disc. 7 small windows ringed its edge. When the disc turned, the woman in the picture raised a shoe, inspected it, and placed it on the table. Gideon had loved moving slides. Across the rim he had scratched 3 words. Lucy will finish. It was the only message that tied his granddaughter directly to the workshop's inheritance. Nathan traced the letters with one finger. His father must have known Augusta would sell the tools.
He had hidden the cassette and placed the key in his son's keeping. Clara said nothing. Gideon had trusted Nathan, and still Nathan had almost allowed every object to be carried away. Love passed on without explanation could fail to save what it intended to protect. Sometimes it had to be named in time. Mr. Bixby helped unfasten the cabinet. Nathan carried the cassette back toward the cottage. Augusta waited below. When she saw the old slide in Lucy's hands, the color left her face. She demanded the glass. For the first time, Nathan answered his mother in the same quiet voice she had always used to command others. The key had been given to him, he said. The cabinet's contents were his father's gift. If family ownership meant so much to Augusta, she would have to recognize his claim as well. She called it a trick and reached toward Lucy. The girl stepped back. Augusta would not create a scene on the pavement. She said only that the family would gather in her parlor that evening and settle the matter. Clara asked whether the women who held Gideon's cards would be invited to this family tribunal. Augusta's gaze moved to the envelope beneath her daughter-in-law's arm. She understood that Clara had found witnesses. For the first time, fear entered her face. Every lamp in the parlor burned that evening. Augusta sat in Gideon's chair. Lydia and Percy occupied the sofa. Nathan placed the old slide on the table, but he did not light the lantern. Augusta began by saying that the image had never been intended for other eyes. It was made before her marriage and had no connection to the present family. Gideon had promised to destroy it. Why had he kept it for 40 years? Her husband had been sentimental, she said, and cruel in his sentiment. He enjoyed remembering people as they themselves did not wish to be remembered.
Lucy said that the picture showed her grandmother saving another woman. Augusta sharply ordered her to be silent. A child could not understand what a factory girl had been in the eyes of respectable society. Gussie Moran had lived with her mother in a damp cellar. She did not know how to hold a dinner fork, and her clothes smelled of glue. After the fire, a charitable woman took her in as a companion. There she learned to speak differently, changed her clothes, and met Gideon. Everything afterward, Augusta insisted, she had built herself, brick by brick. Why, Clara asked, did she despise the women whose labor she had once shared? Because Augusta knew the true cost of the distance between poverty and respectability. One picture could destroy what had taken a lifetime to construct. Councilman Eldridge would never appoint a former gluing room girl to a board. The society ladies would not allow her to collect donations. Lydia would lose her place among the Sunday school teachers. Percy would become the boy from a factory cellar. Clara looked at Lydia. She lowered her eyes. Percy did not move. Augusta admitted that she had taken Lucy's slides. She intended to use only the pictures in which labor appeared orderly and dignified. The blue birds had been concealed and the labels replaced. In Augusta's mind, the picture of young Gussie proved exactly why Gideon could not be permitted to control the collection. Nathan demanded every slide before the lecture. His mother refused. He threatened to tell the judges the truth. Then Augusta mentioned the cottage. The family's arrangement would end on the 1st of April. If Nathan intended to side with a woman determined to make his mother a public joke, he could find that woman another roof. Clara waited for him to ask her to yield for the sake of their home. A month earlier, that was exactly what he would have done. Nathan stood. He would begin searching for rooms in the morning, he said. Augusta recoiled, as if he had struck the table. She turned to Lucy. If the girl persuaded her parents not to disgrace the family, Augusta promised to return the clean glass, buy fresh paints, and even pay for drawing lessons. In exchange, Lucy had only to admit that Gideon directed the work, and Percy was entitled to present it in the Vale name. Lucy regarded her grandmother for a long moment. Then she removed the blue swallow from her pocket and laid it beside the old photograph. "My name is not for sale," she said. Augusta closed her eyes. Clara could not know whose voice the older woman heard, Lucy's, Gideon's, or 17-year-old Gussie Moran's. But when Augusta looked up again, the fear was gone. Only the resolve of someone determined to defend her lie remained. She ordered them out. Nathan carried the cassette. Clara took the old green lantern. Lucy picked up the blue swallow. They crossed the yard together. Light burned in every window of the large house, while the little cottage stood dark. Clara looked at its brick walls and knew that within 2 weeks it would no longer be home. That night, the family began to pack. Packing was easier than finding somewhere else to live. Bellford offered many rooms, but few landlords who welcomed a family with a child. The space above the butcher's shop was cheap and dark. The houses near the canal were damp. A woman on Elm Street would take them only if Clara stopped working at the studio and returned home by 3 every afternoon. Another landlord demanded a written reference from Augusta Vale. Nathan did not ask his mother for one. He calculated that 2 rented rooms would consume almost 1/3 of his wages. Clara offered to work 5 days at Barrow and Pike instead of 3. Lucy could sit in the studio's rear room after school. Nathan did not want his wife paying for his failure to protect the family in time. They were already paying, Clara told him. The important thing now was not to weigh whose guilt was heaviest, but to prevent Augusta from purchasing their return with fear. At last, they found 3 attic rooms above Mrs. Gray's bookbinding shop. The household shared a water pump in the yard, and the rooms had only one small iron stove. But the river was visible from the window. The walls smelled of paste, yet Mrs. Gray did not ask Augusta for a reference. She knew Clara from the photography studio and agreed to wait for the deposit until Nathan's next payday. Lucy chose the narrow room with the sloping ceiling. The white wall opposite the window would be good for showing pictures, she said. It was the first thing that pleased her after the slides disappeared. The family did not attend Augusta's Sunday dinner. Pastor Whitcomb arrived before noon. He removed his hat, shook away the snow and declined tea, as though the purpose of his visit was too moral for ordinary hospitality. Augusta, he explained, was suffering deeply because of her son's disrespect. Rumors of a family quarrel were spreading, and a public competition was no place to settle a dispute about household property. Clara asked who had told the town about the dispute. The pastor looked uncomfortable. Augusta had asked several ladies to pray for a son under a harmful influence. In a small town, a prayer request traveled faster than a newspaper report. Nathan told him that the slides belonged to Lucy and had been removed without permission. Legal ownership of the glass was uncertain, Pastor Whitcomb replied. A child's Christian duty to honor her elders was not. Lucy carried the empty walnut case into the room and placed it before him. Which commandment, she asked, allowed an adult to cover another person's name and claim her work? The pastor looked at Nathan, expecting him to send the child away. Nathan did not move. Before leaving, Whitcomb warned that a scandal would injure Lucy most of all. Her schoolmates, the church circle, and future acquaintances would remember her as an ungrateful granddaughter. After he left, Nathan paced the cottage. Clara thought he was frightened. Instead, he took out a clean sheet of paper and wrote to his editor, asking that his name be removed from the typesetting of the competition program. He would not participate in printing a notice that presented his daughter's work as someone else's. The next day, the editor transferred him from municipal contracts to late-night advertisements. His wages were reduced. No one mentioned Augusta. The editor merely said that a printer must learn to separate private opinions from professional duty. Nathan accepted the decision without argument. He returned near dawn. Clara had left soup warming on the stove. He ate while she mended a sleeve beneath the lamp. Nathan said he finally understood why Clara had told her own mother so little about the early years of their marriage. He used to think she was protecting Augusta from criticism. In truth, Clara had been protecting him from shame he should have felt much sooner. She had also been protecting herself. To tell her mother that her husband always asked her to endure humiliation for the sake of peace would have invited the question Clara feared most. Why do you remain? Nathan set down his spoon. For the first time, Clara told him how often she had considered leaving. After Lucy's birth, when Augusta changed the baby's middle name in the church record from Mildred to Augusta. 3 years later, when her mother-in-law gave Clara's sewing machine to Lydia because a widow supposedly needed it more. And every time Nathan called the incident a misunderstanding. Clara did not list these things to punish him. She needed him to understand that the glass slides were not the first objects to disappear. Smaller rights had vanished before them. The right to name a child, close a door, own what one had earned, or be believed the first time one spoke. The empty walnut case merely made those earlier losses visible. Nathan said he would not ask her to stay with him if she chose to leave him along with Augusta's house. Clara studied his exhausted face. Her decision had not yet been made. Protecting their daughter did not erase 12 years. But for the first time, Nathan was not asking her to erase them either. That mattered.
They sat on opposite sides of the table. The silence between them was no longer the old silence. It was a difficult conversation that had finally begun. Clara visited the other women in the series. Rosa Bianchi worked in a shop where wooden heels were cut and shaped. She was 19, and the foreman allowed conversation only during the noon break. Clara waited outside the gate. Rosa carried her photographic card in a little candy tin. In the picture, she held a bundle of heels. Beneath it, Lucy had written, "Rosa can identify 8 kinds of wood by touch." Old Mrs. Doyle lived near the railroad embankment. She examined Gideon's name for a long time and then brought out 2 pictures instead of 1. The first showed Mary Doyle as she was now, repairing a child's shoe. The second showed young Gussie Moran carrying her from a smoke-filled room. It was not the same image as the slide in the cabinet. A photographer had caught the 2 girls outside the factory immediately after the fire. Gussie's braid was burned, and Mary lay in her arms. Mrs. Doyle explained that the fire began when an alcohol lamp overturned. The manager had locked a side door to prevent the workers from leaving before the whistle. Gussie smashed a window with a wooden shoe last and went back for Mary.
The factory owner later accused her of damaging property and dismissed her without her wages. The charitable woman in Augusta's story had indeed taken the girl into her home. It was not entirely an act of compassion. A Boston newspaper had printed the story of the brave factory worker, and the wealthy lady enjoyed possessing such an interesting young companion. Gussie learned manners, received new dresses, and was introduced as a distant relation. 2 years later, she begged Mary never to visit the Vale house. Gideon continued to see his wife's old friend in secret. When he delivered the photograph in December, he told Mary that Augusta did not truly fear poverty. She feared the witness who remembered who she had been before she learned to despise the poor. Mrs. Doyle did not want revenge. She kept the picture because it showed Augusta performing the finest act of her life. Clara asked her to attend the Mechanics' Hall lecture. The old woman shook her head. Crowds made it difficult for her to breathe. She allowed Clara to borrow the card only after receiving a promise that it would not be used to make Augusta an object of ridicule. Clara gave her word. Keeping it would prove harder than any other promise she made. 1 week before the competition, the Mechanics Association secretary received Clara in a storage room behind the hall. Folding chairs, flags, and plaster busts surrounded them. Mr. Soames was a thin and orderly man who spoke as though he were recording minutes even at breakfast. Clara showed him the cards and Lucy's sketchbook. She explained how the slides had been created. The resemblance was convincing, Mr. Soames admitted, but the rules judged the lecture, not the authorship of the visual aids. If the family had allowed Percy to use the collection, the association would not interfere in an inheritance dispute. The family had not allowed it, Clara said.
One woman had removed the glass from a child's room. The secretary asked who legally owned the cottage, the workshop, the lantern, and the glass itself. Each answer was either Augusta's name or the absence of any written instruction from Gideon. Clara produced the rotating disc with the scratched words, "Lucy will finish." Mr. Soames examined it and agreed that the message had moral importance. It was unlikely to settle ownership. In the end, he advised her not to make a public accusation. Even a just complaint from a woman, he observed, was often remembered more harshly than the injustice that caused it. Clara put away the cards. People who took another person's work depended upon exactly that kind of memory, she said. The hall's caretaker caught up with her in the corridor. Mr. Coyle had known Gideon through his public exhibitions. He had overheard the conversation through the thin door and asked to see the rotating disc.
The writing belonged to the old man, Coyle confirmed. Then he described Percy's technical rehearsal. Several slides had been poorly remounted, new black corners lifted from the heat, and Augusta ordered them glued more firmly. She would not allow anyone else near the table. Clara asked to inspect the glass in her capacity as an employee of the photography studio. The caretaker would have trusted her, but Augusta controlled the collection. He did not dare ignore her orders. He did, however,
show Clara the lantern selected for the competition. It was a large apparatus with a brilliant limelight burner and 2 slide carriers. While one view filled the screen, the next could be prepared. The light was powerful and hot. Fresh paste would soften within minutes. Clara ran a finger along the brass carrier. She did not need to steal every picture back before the lecture. She only needed the black covers to fall away in front of the audience. For that to happen, someone would have to alter the frames. Percy arrived late one evening. The family had already tied its books in bundles. He carried one of the stolen slides beneath his vest. It was the view of the button table. A black paper corner covered the blue bird. Along the bottom ran a new label, A Study of Labor, P. Hale. The glass had cracked during rehearsal, Percy explained. Augusta planned to omit it, but he offered to take it to Mr. Barrow for repair. She gave permission on the condition that it be returned in the morning. Clara examined the frame in lamplight. Only the thin protective pane was damaged. It could be replaced in an hour. Lucy would not come closer. Why had Percy brought it there rather than to the studio? He wanted to know the truth about the swallow. During rehearsal, one corner had lifted, and the caretaker called it Lucy's mark. Percy realized that people in Bellford knew more about the collection than his speech admitted. Clara softened the new paper with a damp brush. Beneath it, the blue swallow emerged. On the reverse of the frame, Gideon's handwriting remained. Sketch LV, color LV. Percy sat down. He looked ill. Lucy reminded him that she had already shown him the sketchbook. He had known enough. There was a difference between knowing in his cousin's small bedroom and knowing on a brilliantly lit stage, Percy admitted. He had hoped to win the prize before his shame caught up with him. Nathan asked whether he intended to withdraw. Percy shook his head. Lydia had already borrowed money from Augusta for the Boston lodging deposit. Without the scholarship, his mother would be left in debt and without hope. He asked whether there might be a way to preserve the lecture, but honestly name Lucy as the maker of the images. The judges might disqualify him, Clara warned. He understood. For the first time, someone Augusta had raised accepted a consequence before asking forgiveness. They worked at the studio until midnight. Clara replaced the cracked protective glass. Lucy restored the green thread on the girl's sleeve. Then Clara made a narrow strip of frosted glass that could slide inside the frame. In its ordinary position, Percy's false label remained visible. If a small brass tab was pulled, the strip moved, concealed his name, and revealed Lucy's own words. Drawn from Life by Lucy Vale, age 12. It was the same principle Gideon used for moving lantern pictures. One gesture transformed the image. Clara did not ask Percy to pull the tab. She only showed him how it worked. Before leaving, he asked about the old slide of Augusta. Lucy told him the story. Percy was silent for a long time. Then he said that his grandmother had ordered him to describe factory women as grateful recipients of charity, although she herself had escaped a locked room through a broken window. Clara warned him that Augusta's past must not become a weapon. His grandmother had taken another person's work, and that had to be exposed. Poverty and a factory number were not crimes. Percy nodded. In the morning, he carried the repaired slide away. The little brass tab remained inside its frame. No one asked whether he intended to pull it. 4 days remained before the competition. Clara packed their dishes in newspaper. Nathan took apart the bedstead. Lucy carried the clean glass, the sketchbook, and the small green lantern to the new rooms. They decided to move the walnut case last. Clara was afraid the finished slides would rattle apart on a handcart. Everyone left early on Thursday. Nathan went to the newspaper, where an urgent advertisement had kept him after his night shift. Clara and Lucy went to the studio. When they returned after noon, they found the cottage door partly open. The packing boxes had not been disturbed. The silver spoons, Nathan's watch, and the coins inside a tin remained exactly where they had been left. Only the old slide of Gussie Moran was missing. Clara examined the lock. There was no damage. Augusta still possessed the spare key. Nathan arrived an hour later. Clara told him only that the old glass was gone. He did not ask whether Lucy had moved it. He did not search through the newspapers or demand a witness. He put on his coat and crossed the yard at once. Augusta would not open the door. From the other side, she answered that she was occupied with preparations for the lecture and would not listen to another accusation. Nathan said he would change the lock, although the family would be leaving in 2 days. His mother laughed. The door belonged to her, she reminded him. Nathan returned with a workman and fitted an inside bolt, the one safeguard he could add without damaging Augusta's property. Then he sat beside Lucy and told her he believed her. Why did he no longer need proof? Proof had never been the true need, he answered. What he had lacked was the courage to accept that Lucy's words would change everything he believed about his mother. In the past, he had made his wife and child pay the cost of that change. Clara stood by the window. She had waited years to hear him say it. Relief did not come immediately. A late truth could not return all the time a person had spent alone. It could, however, prevent the loneliness from continuing. Lucy opened the walnut case, removed the blue swallow, and hung it around her neck once more. On Friday, Augusta sent Lydia to demand the green lantern. It was not needed for the lecture. Mechanics' Hall had a larger apparatus. Yet Augusta claimed every object that had belonged to her husband. Nathan refused. Lydia began to cry. She was gentler than her mother, but that gentleness often served Augusta more effectively than an order. She spoke of the lodging debt and of Percy's sleepless nights. If the judges disqualified him, his future would be over. She begged Clara to endure one evening. Afterward, the glass would be returned, and Lucy had a lifetime in which to make hundreds of new pictures. Why could Percy not make hundreds of his own? He had no time, Lydia said. Once again, another person's labor became insignificant simply because it had already been performed. Lucy brought out the rotating disc and showed her aunt the words, "Lucy will finish." Gideon had left Percy many things, books, tools, and memories, but he had asked Lucy to finish this one. Lydia traced the scratched letters. Then she admitted that she had seen Lucy drawing inside the workshop. She had seen the blue swallows, too. When Augusta proposed the slides for Percy's lecture, Lydia understood what was happening. She remained silent because one scholarship seemed more important than justice for a girl. For the first time, she described her choice without hiding behind the words family or necessity. Clara asked whether she was prepared to repeat the admission before the judges. Lydia was frightened. She could not oppose her mother in public, she said, but she would no longer ask Clara to remain silent. Before leaving, she revealed that Augusta kept the glass in a leather traveling case. On Saturday morning, the case would be delivered to Mechanics' Hall, and Percy would be responsible for it from then on. It was not the sort of courage newspapers praised. Lydia did not expose her mother or rescue her son from a lie. She simply stopped blocking those who meant to act. In a family where one person's will had occupied every room for years, even that became a first free movement. The family left the cottage on Saturday morning. They did not wait for the 1st of April. Mrs. Gray allowed them to take the attic rooms early. Mr. Barrow lent them a handcart. The snow had melted, but the streets were deep with mud. One wheel became stuck twice, and Clara carried the walnut case against her chest. Augusta watched from the turret window. She never came into the yard. Nathan left the outside key on the kitchen table. Beside it, he placed the receipts for coal and roof repairs, unwilling to let his mother say that they had spent 12 years beneath her roof without contributing a cent. Then he reconsidered and took the receipts with him. There was no purpose in proving the price of their life to someone who measured help in obedience. He left only the key. One thing remained inside the cottage,
a column of pencil marks along the bedroom doorframe. Each year, Gideon had measured Lucy's height and written the date beside it.
The lowest line reached Clara's knee. The newest came almost to her shoulder. Lucy asked Nathan to cut out the piece of wood. He explained that they could not damage another person's door, so she pressed a sheet of paper across the marks and rubbed the side of a pencil over it. Every line appeared on the page. She rolled it carefully and placed it inside the walnut case. Sometimes, Clara thought, a house could be carried away only like that, not in walls, but in the record of a child growing inside them. The attic rooms were cold. Smoke escaped the stove until Mrs. Gray cleared the damper. The staircase smelled of glue and hot binding board. But every door had its own key, and their landlady knocked before she brought up a kettle. Lucy hung the blue swallow beside the white wall. It cast a small colored stain near her pillow. For now, it was the room's only decoration. That evening they were expected at Mechanics' Hall. Clara considered leaving Lucy at home. She feared the judges might allow Percy to complete the lecture and the town would dismiss her daughter as jealous. Lucy refused. She could not leave her pictures alone again among people who knew them only through someone else's speech. Nathan supported her. Clara wore a plain brown dress. Lucy put on her blue school dress. Nathan took out the suit he had worn at their wedding. It pulled tightly across his shoulders. Before they left, he asked Clara to stop him if he ever again tried to call silence peace. She told him she would no longer do even that work for him. Nathan nodded. He took Lucy's hand. The three of them walked to the hall together. Mechanics' Hall occupied the second floor above a shop selling farm machinery. The staircase smelled of oil, damp coats, and heated metal from the projection lantern. 2 association members wearing blue ribbons stood at the door. More than 200 people had already gathered inside. Augusta sat in the front row. She wore black silk and the hat with its rigid feather. Councilman Eldridge, Pastor Whitcomb, and 3 ladies of the Improvement Society sat beside her. Lydia occupied the seat at the end, twisting a handkerchief in her lap. Clara saw Anna Novak in the final row. The laundress had come directly from work, and her hair was still damp from steam. Miss Fitch sat among several former pupils. Mrs. Price held her medical bag on her knees as though she might be summoned at any moment. Rosa Bianchi stood beside the wall. Each woman carried her photographic card. Mr. Barrow took a place beside the caretaker, Mr. Coyle. Edna Shaw distributed a simple printed sheet listing the names of the women in the series. The paper contained no accusation, only names, trades, and years of work. Augusta noticed them. Her back grew straighter. She spoke to Councilman Eldridge, who summoned Secretary Soames. But the hall was open to the public. No one dared remove a laundress, a midwife, and a schoolteacher merely because they recognized themselves in the pictures. Percy appeared from behind the curtain. His new suit fitted badly. He held the pages of his speech while the leather case rested on a table beside the lantern. The boy searched the audience until he found Lucy. He touched 2 fingers to the pocket of his waistcoat. Clara did not understand the gesture. 3 young men were competing. The first demonstrated a model steam dryer. The second spoke about paving stones and drains. The audience applauded politely. Augusta listened to neither. She watched Clara. At last, the chairman introduced Percy Hale and praised the educational work of his late grandfather. Clara felt Lucy's body stiffen beside her. The lamps were lowered. Only a narrow red glow remained near the lantern burner. Percy began confidently. His first pictures showed factory buildings, new bridges, and the streetcar depot. Those were Gideon's older views, made long before Lucy was born. Then the women appeared. Percy read the prepared words about order and the benevolent influence of industry. Rosa stood on the wall holding wooden heels. A black corner covered the swallow, and a new label called the view a study by Percy Hale. Rosa raised her card. Few people noticed in the darkness. Next came Miss Fitch at the schoolhouse stove. And then Mrs. Novak in the steam. Anna rose to her feet. Several heads turned. Percy stopped in the middle of a sentence. He looked toward Augusta. She gave one small nod, ordering him to continue. He continued. When the hands of the button girls appeared on the white wall, Clara recognized the repaired slide immediately. The hairline crack ran beside one thumb. A green thread shone against the sleeve. Percy reached for the brass tab. Augusta saw the motion and stood. The boy pulled. The frosted strip inside the frame moved. His false label disappeared. The black corner lifted, and the blue swallow spread its wings in the white light. Beneath the women's hands, a line emerged. Drawn from life by Lucy Vale, age 12. A whisper moved through the audience. Augusta ordered the lantern extinguished. Mr. Coyle remained beside the burner. He looked at Percy. The boy shook his head. Instead of returning to Augusta's speech, Percy told the hall that he had drawn none of the women in the pictures. Lucy made the sketches. Lucy added the color. Gideon taught her and prepared the glass. Augusta Vale had ordered the blue marks covered. Percy himself had agreed because he wanted the scholarship. Augusta advanced toward the platform. The end of the ostrich feather trembled. She demanded that the competition be halted and called the confession a family plot. Percy opened the leather traveling case. From a narrow side compartment, he removed the old slide that had disappeared from the cottage. Clara understood. Augusta herself had brought it to the hall, perhaps to break it in the caretaker's stove after the lecture, perhaps simply to make certain that Clara could not display it. Percy had discovered the glass inside the hidden pocket. He placed it in the lantern. 17-year-old Gussie Moran appeared on the wall beside the gluing table. One burned hand pressed against her apron. Factory number 147 hung at her breast. The girl's face remained visible inside Augusta's aging one. Nathan stopped breathing. Whispers crossed the hall. Someone spoke Augusta's name. Someone else said, Moran. Councilman Eldridge shifted away from her empty chair. Percy began to describe the fire and the window Gussie had broken. Clara stepped forward. She had not entered the hall intending to defend Augusta. For weeks, Clara had been defending her daughter from the older woman, but the promise she gave Mrs. Doyle had been clear. The old photograph would not become an instrument of ridicule. Clara asked Percy to stop. Then she turned toward the audience. On the illuminated wall, young Gussie stood taller than anyone in the room. Her injured hand looked enormous. This picture proved no shame, Clara said. It showed a 17-year-old girl who worked for her bread and carried a friend out of a burning shop. If a woman could lose her place in a civic society because of such a past, the shame belonged not to the girl on the wall, but to the society. The whispering ceased. Augusta stood in the aisle. Her face appeared almost white in the lantern glow. She accused Clara of bringing the photograph for revenge. The old glass had been removed from Clara's home 2 days earlier, Clara answered. She had not intended to show it to anyone, but now that the image was already on the wall, she would not allow Augusta's poverty to become an accusation, just as she would not allow Lucy's labor to become a gift bestowed upon Percy. They were two separate truths. For years, Augusta had deliberately bound such truths together. If Clara defended her daughter's name, she must be trying to destroy her mother-in-law's. If Percy confessed, he must be surrendering his entire future. If Nathan believed his wife, he must be betraying his mother. Augusta placed everyone before a false choice in which every act of dignity looked like an act of cruelty toward her. Clara separated the truths before the entire hall. There was no shame in being Gussie Moran. There was no right to erase Lucy Vale. Nathan walked into the aisle. He was not a man accustomed to speeches. He spent his life setting other people's words in type and preferred to stand beside the press while others addressed the room. Now more than 200 faces turned toward him. He named Lucy as the maker of the drawings and Gideon as her teacher. Then he admitted that his wife and daughter had told him about the missing slides long before the printed program appeared. He demanded proof because he was afraid of what the truth would reveal about his own mother. Nathan did not ask the audience to forgive Augusta, and he did not ask the judges to reward Percy. He spoke only of his own responsibility. A family name did not give adults the right to take a child's work, he said. A roof did not buy the silence of the people who lived beneath it. Clara listened with trembling hands. It was not a beautiful rescue performed at the final moment. Nathan could not undo the empty weeks, the humiliation at Sunday dinner, or his quiet demand for evidence. Yet for the first time, he spoke the truth where it would cost him more than discomfort at home. It might cost him his reputation. Lucy walked to the platform. Percy removed the old slide and placed it in her hands. Then he opened the traveling case. All 7 missing views stood inside. A black paper corner concealed the swallow on each one. Lucy selected the image of Mrs. Novak. Anna raised her photographic card. The picture on the paper matched the picture on the glass, down to the scar, the dark wedding band, and the fold in her apron. Miss Fitch showed hers, then Rosa, Mrs. Price, Edna Shaw, and 2 other women. Mr. Barrow confirmed that Gideon ordered the prints before his death and that Lucy's captions had been written at the same time. Mr. Coyle described the fresh labels pasted over the frames. Proof no longer rested inside a single object. It stood throughout the hall in the hands of women to whom Gideon and Lucy had already returned their own images. The association chairman asked for the room lights. The enormous figure of Gussie disappeared, though the shape of her face remained in people's eyes for several seconds. The judges withdrew. Conversation erupted. Councilman Eldridge went into the corridor without saying goodbye to Augusta. Pastor Whitcomb offered her his arm, but she refused it. Lydia went to her son. Percy told her that he would not receive the scholarship. She embraced him and, for the first time that evening, looked at the boy rather than the judges. She had feared the loss of the prize as though her son's whole life would end without it. Now she feared something else. The man he might have become if he had won. Augusta heard her. Poverty would cure them of their noble speeches soon enough, she said. Percy answered that he would work and enter again the following year with a model of his own. Clara's mother used to say that honesty did not put food on a table, but without it, every meal stuck in the throat. Clara did not repeat the saying. Percy would have to live through the consequences without someone turning them into an easy lesson. The judges returned 20 minutes later. Because the material listed as Percy's original work had been made by another person, the chairman announced his lecture could not be considered. The scholarship went to the young man who built the steam dryer. Someone began to applaud. Percy lowered his head, but he did not leave. The Mechanics Association offered Lucy a separate public showing after permission had been obtained from the women in the pictures. Secretary Soames delivered the offer cautiously. Lucy thanked him. Before showing anything, she said, she would ask each woman whether she wanted her image placed on the wall. Mrs. Novak laughed first. The others joined her, not at Augusta, but out of relief. A child had expressed the rule the adults had lacked from the beginning. Augusta ordered Lydia to come home. Lydia remained beside Percy. Then Augusta turned to Nathan. After that evening, she said, she no longer had a son. He went pale, but answered without anger. Motherhood, like a house, did not cease to exist merely because someone refused an order for the first time. If Augusta wished to see him, she would have to come without presenting an account of every kindness she had ever performed. She looked at Clara. There was no remorse in her expression, only weariness and rage that the people around her had begun to speak in their own voices. Augusta left alone. The black feather disappeared through the door. After the lecture, Clara, Lucy, and Nathan returned the pictures to the walnut case. The 7 empty slots filled again. Lucy removed the black corners but did not throw them away. She placed them in a separate envelope. Clara asked why she wanted them. The girl wished to remember not only the return of the slides, but what had been done to them.
Otherwise, someone might one day claim that nothing serious had ever happened. Nathan heard her and turned toward the lantern. Clara saw him wipe his eyes. Percy helped Mr. Coyle extinguish the burner. Before leaving, he returned the brass tab to Lucy. He had found Augusta's old slide in the side pocket of the case, together with a small hammer for breaking glass. His grandmother probably intended to destroy it after the lecture. Percy explained that he had not shown the picture for revenge. Augusta's official speech described factory women as passive recipients of benevolence, yet the first of those women had rescued a life and escaped through a window she broke herself. Clara reminded him that he had still used Augusta's image without her permission. Percy offered no excuse. He understood that too, he said. Lucy held the old glass with both hands. She wanted to return it to her grandmother. Nathan objected that Augusta would destroy it.
The picture belonged to Augusta more than it belonged to them, Lucy answered. But the story of Mary Doyle belonged to another woman as well. Lucy would give back the glass if Augusta promised not to break it. Clara was not certain that her mother-in-law could accept a condition from her granddaughter. They wrapped the slide and placed it in a separate box. Rain was falling outside. The new rooms were far away, and Nathan hired a carriage, although little money remained. Lucy held the walnut case across her knees. Whenever the wheels dropped into a rut, she steadied the lid. The attic rooms were cold. Mrs. Gray had left a basket beside the door containing bread, eggs, and a piece of ham. She had not entered. A note tied to the handle read, "The first breakfast beneath your own roof should be a full one." Nathan read it aloud. Then he knocked on Lucy's bedroom door, although it stood open. The girl looked surprised before inviting him inside.
He helped her place the walnut case beneath the white wall. The green lantern stood on the table. The blue swallow beside the window cast a colored edge across the pillow. Clara lit the stove. They had no rugs, no good wardrobe, and no dining table. 3 plates rested on an upturned crate. But for the first time in 12 years, no one beyond the walls owned a spare key. Late that night, Nathan told Clara that he owed her an apology. She had heard his admission in the hall. He shook his head. The public words concerned the pictures. Something larger stood between husband and wife. Nathan apologized for forcing her to prove what should have been accepted when she first spoke. Again and again he demanded evidence until it became loud enough for him. He called himself a keeper of peace, but each time he had purchased his own comfort with Clara's. She listened. Nathan did not promise that he would never be afraid again.
He did not pretend one evening had transformed him into another man. He promised only that he would no longer demand proof when his wife spoke about her own experience, and that he would never again disguise fear beneath the word peace. Trust would not return because of one speech either, Clara answered. They would have to rebuild it like a glass picture, layer by layer, knowing that the crack would still be visible whenever light passed through it. Nathan agreed. They lay on a mattress near the stove. The familiar strip of sheet remained between them. This time, Nathan reached across it without pretending that the problem was finished. He rested his open hand in the middle and waited. After several minutes, Clara placed her hand over his. Augusta did not leave the large house for 9 days. The Civic Improvement Society postponed its meeting.
The ladies did so not out of compassion, but because none of them knew how to behave toward a woman whose youth had filled an illuminated wall. Some called her a fraud. Others were suddenly impressed by the story of the fire. A third group insisted that origins did not matter, using the very tone that revealed how much they mattered. The newspaper printed a short account. The editor omitted the factory number, but named Lucy as a creator of the Lantern series. Nathan insisted that his daughter's full name remain in the report. At the bottom appeared one line, "Correction set by Nathan Vale." He received another reprimand. Yet several workshop owners who attended the competition began placing advertisements with the printer who would not change a name to please an influential lady. Within a month, Nathan was restored to the day shift. Percy found work as an assistant to a draftsman at the pump factory.
For the first several weeks, he came home with blue marking dye on his cuffs and complained about endless straight lines. Then, he began designing a valve model of his own. Lucy helped him photograph the parts, but they signed every glass plate together before it was developed. Lydia took in collar work. Augusta offered to pay the Boston lodging debt if she forbade Percy to see Clara and Lucy. Lydia refused. The decision cost her many nights at the sewing machine. That did not make her a heroine. It did mean that for once her exhaustion came from her own choice. The women from the pictures began meeting in the studio's back room on Sundays. They decided which views could be shown and how each one should be described. Rosa asked Lucy to omit her workstation number but leave the cut on her finger. Miss Fitch added the names of 2 pupils who carried coal for the school stove.
Mrs. Price would not permit the number of births she attended to appear. Several families had concealed those children. Anna Novak insisted that the caption beneath her picture include the price she was paid for washing one hotel sheet. It was not an account book or a legal record. It was only the first time the women had been allowed to choose the words placed beneath their own hands. Lucy finished Gideon's rotating disc. In 7 small pictures, a woman lifted a shoe, inspected the stitching, and placed it on the table. The movement was simple, yet when the disc turned in front of the lantern, the woman came alive across the wall. Lucy placed a blue swallow along the lower edge. The association scheduled the new showing for May. The girl changed the title. Instead of "The Hands That Hold Up a Town," she called it "The Names of Bellford's Women." Why abandon her grandfather's title? Clara asked. The hands had always been visible, Lucy said.
It was the names that had been hidden. 2 days before the May exhibition, someone knocked on the door of the new rooms. Clara was alone. Nathan was at the newspaper and Lucy at school. Augusta stood on the landing. Without the feathered hat, she looked smaller. She wore a plain gray dress and held a little tin box. Clara did not invite her in. She asked what Augusta wanted. The old glass slide belonged to her, Augusta said. Clara reminded her of Lucy's condition. The picture would be returned only if Augusta promised not to destroy it. Her mother-in-law was not accustomed to answering to a child for the disposition of her own face. Clara nodded and began to close the door. Augusta stopped it with one hand. In the past, she would simply have entered. This time, she remained on the landing. After a long pause, she promised not to break the glass. Clara let her in. Augusta surveyed the 3 cramped rooms. She saw the shared pump in the yard, the cheap stove, and an upturned crate serving as a night table. She could have said that she had warned them. She did not. Clara brought out the old slide. Augusta held it against the window, and her young face emerged in the daylight. Her thumb rested directly over the factory number. After the fire, she said, Gideon had found her in the charitable woman's household. He was repairing a clock there. He knew about the factory from the first day and had never been ashamed of it. His acceptance humiliated Augusta more deeply than contempt might have. Gideon regarded the factory as an ordinary part of her, while she dedicated her whole life to becoming the kind of woman for whom such a past seemed impossible. Why had he preserved the image against her wishes? He had wanted to show it to their children one day. To him, the fire was a story worth remembering. Augusta forbade it. Then Nathan was born, and with each passing year the truth became harder to tell. When Gideon began the series with Lucy, Augusta understood that he was returning to the old purpose. The same red wrists, scars, and factory dust appeared beneath the girl's hand. Lucy saw people as Gideon had seen Gussie, without the useful shame Augusta believed society required. That was why she took the best slides, not because she thought they were childish scribbles. She was afraid because Lucy had enough talent to make the truth visible. It was a late admission, but it was not yet an apology. Clara asked whether Augusta understood what she had done to her granddaughter. The older woman remained silent. At last, she said that she had covered Lucy's name in the same way her benefactor once covered the name Gussie Moran beneath a new dress and polished speech. Augusta had always called that rescue. Only when she saw the wall in Mechanics Hall did she understand that a rescue, requiring someone to disappear, could resemble another kind of fire. She placed the tin box on the table. Inside lay factory number 147, its edges melted by heat. Beside it rested a little piece of blue glass, the first swallow Gideon had cut many years earlier. He had invented the mark before Lucy was born, but Augusta forced him to put it away with the photograph. Clara understood why the bird mattered so much to Gideon. It had not begun as decoration for a child's work. It was a promise he once failed to keep for his own wife. He allowed Augusta to conceal her name, then taught his granddaughter not to repeat their silence. Augusta asked Clara to give Lucy the factory number and the first swallow. She took the old slide. At the door, Clara asked whether she would attend the May exhibition. Her presence would distract the audience, Augusta replied. Clara did not persuade her. Her mother-in-law had descended one step when she stopped. Without turning around, Augusta said that the slides had belonged to Lucy. All of them, even the ones upon which Gideon prepared the first photographic outline. Augusta had known it from the beginning. Then she left. Clara stood in the doorway listening to her footsteps. She had not forgiven her mother-in-law. The admission did not return the nights when Lucy felt ashes of telling the truth. But for the first time, Augusta had departed without taking anything she had not been given, and left behind an object she could have kept hidden forever. For the May exhibition, a white screen was hung inside the school hall. Fewer people attended than had come to the competition, but every seat was occupied. The women from the pictures sat in the front row. Nathan printed the program. 3 lines appeared beside each view: the name of the woman depicted, Lucy's name, and Gideon Vale's contribution. Percy managed the large lantern with Mr. Coyle. He did not deliver a lecture. He only changed the glass when his cousin signaled. Lucy was frightened at first. Clara could see the paper trembling in her hands. Then Mrs. Novak appeared on the wall, and Anna spoke her own name. Rosa rose next, followed by Miss Fitch, Mrs. Price, and the others. Each name supported the next. When they reached the rotating disc, Percy turned the handle. The woman on the wall lifted the shoe, inspected its seam, and placed it on the table. A blue bird flew across the corner. The audience applauded. Lucy looked toward the back of the room. Augusta stood near the door in a plain gray dress without her hat. She had arrived after the beginning and had not taken a seat. The old slide was wrapped in dark cloth beneath one arm. Lucy noticed her but did not call her forward. She raised factory number 147 and told the story of a young woman who broke a window during a fire. She did not give the girl's name. Augusta stepped out of the shadow herself. The girl had been called Gussie Moran, she said. Later, she became Augusta Vale. Then she handed the slide to Percy. The young face appeared on the wall. This time, no one whispered. Mrs. Doyle, who had come after all, rose from her chair. Across 40 years of silence, the 2 old women looked at one another. Augusta did not ask the audience to forgive her. She walked to Mary and sat beside her. It was too little to restore a friendship, and a great deal for a woman who had spent her whole life fearing one gaze from the past. Clara remained beside the screen. Nathan stood near her but did not stand in front of her. After the showing, the audience was slow to leave. Augusta departed before Lucy finished packing the glass. She tapped once on the walnut lid and asked whether she might see the pictures again someday. Lucy said that she might. But first, she would have to knock.
Augusta nodded.
Back in the attic rooms, Lucy placed factory number 147 in the 24th slot. Beside it, she laid the 2 blue swallows, Gideon's first one and her own. The other spaces slowly filled with new views. Clara no longer counted them out of fear. Sometimes she inspected a paper frame, helped mix a color, or asked how Lucy wanted the new work signed. Nathan returned from the newspaper office each evening and knocked on his daughter's door. At first, Lucy laughed because the door usually stood open. In time, the short knock became one of the ordinary sounds of the home, not a request for permission to care, but an acknowledgement that a boundary existed. One evening, Clara saw the 3 of their shadows on the white wall. Lucy held a piece of glass, Nathan adjusted the wick of Gideon's green lantern, while Clara stretched the sheet. Their shadows were crooked and different in size.
They did not resemble a perfect family portrait, but none of them concealed another. Lucy inserted a new slide. Light passed through the glass, and the hands of a woman opening a window appeared on the wall. A blue swallow spread its wings in the corner. Beneath the picture stood a name, clear and whole. No one could ever call it unnecessary again.